Greetings, Dragonball fans, and welcome to part 4 of Flaminice's suggested What If Piccolo Stayed Evil, where Goku's foot got stuck in his mouth and everything goes pear-shaped when Piccolo took offense at the bad-natured ribbing, then took Gohan for his own purposes. Previously, we saw Mirai, the Chi-Chi look-alike and future version of Pan, daughter of the slowly reacclimated future Gohan and Videl, make her way back into the past to try and undo some of the horrors that she was born into. After failing to stay out of the battle with the Saiyans, she shows some of her true colors and resoundingly puts Vegeta in his place. She also put Piccolo in his, as she casually crushed his Makan Kosopo charging fingers into a fine green and purple paste. The Z-Fighters, none of whom have died, are now discussing a possible trip to Namek, the home of the apparently Namekians, as they're called. Will they face down the giant fridge before setting their sights on the real threat, those androids and that disturbingly strong amalgamation of everyone in the room? So, as the father and daughter doctors and all-around stupidly smart genius inventors rapidly assemble the ship, with the aid of decades of tweaks by the future Bulma, Goku takes the Z-Fighters to Korin's tower. He'd really like some training, and possibly a senzu for Vegeta, who is still bedridden. When asked if he is serious, Goku just nods over at Mirai and says that if Vegeta gets out of line, she can just deck him again, which gets a nice round of nods and smiles. Unfortunately, Korin only has a handful of beans, but they're nowhere near ripe yet. He could maybe spare one, but while it won't be a full recovery, it might speed things along. Well, that or poison him. It's tough to tell with these beans, and he doesn't really want to recall what his insides felt like last time he tried one that wasn't properly ripe yet. So why not go train in the meantime? Maybe Kami and Mr. Popo can help. Mirai, for one, is amazed at the extent of the lookout. In all her father's stories of roaming that future world, he had never seen this place. Not the tower, not Korin's home, nor the lookout that floats even higher above. When they get there, Kami isn't sure what he can do to help, and Mirai is having trouble controlling herself. He looks like an old, shriveled Piccolo, but they're all so calm around him. So this is that Kami guy they'd all mentioned. The good half of Piccolo, was it? As the rest of them spar, Mirai manages to excuse herself from Goku's desperate attempts to train with her, and she sits down with the elderly guardian to ask the man about himself and, Piccolo. Now filled in on their history and seeing the sad look on the old Namkin's face, Mirai asks if there's anything they can do about the androids. Any special training they can go through? Those magical beans are cool and all, but even after years of fighting and healing and fighting, they were still so very, very strong. And then there was that other guy, or thing, or whatever it was. Kami thinks on this, regarding the young woman carefully for a while. Finally, he says that there may be a place. It is not for the faint of heart, however. On the plus side, since Bulma is still a few days away from finishing off that spiffy new ship of hers, they have time for that many years of training. Years? What? Ah, yes, the hyperbolic time chamber. Within those doors, time moves 365 times faster than it does out here. It's also a really tough place to live, though. The atmosphere is thick and hard to move in, while the pressure of gravity is upwards of 10 times that of Earth. The more Kami tries to dissuade the girl, the more her eyes light up. A proper training arena, with people who actually care about each other? Where is it? When can they go in? Oh, only 2 at a time for a max of 2 years inside per person. Why only 2 people? Oh, 'cause of the food? Well, couldn't they just take extra food with them? There's no storage. Well, she has, among other things, a literal time ship in her pocket, she says, holding out the capsule for Kami to see. She's sure Bulma can spare some food and houses and other capsules, if they ask nicely. Kami reluctantly points them to the doorway, and a few hours later, with a crate of capsules in hand, Mirai enters the chamber. She is followed immediately by Goku, Gohan, and Krillin. Tien and Yamcha arrive almost 2 hours, or a month later, depending on your perspective, with a stretcher, carrying the still slightly broken Vegeta. They set Vegeta down with a thump and a very satisfying grunt from the prince, before heading out to see what all the commotion is about. There they see that young woman who looks so much like Chi-Chi it's spooky, but she's got blonde hair for some reason, and she is batting at Goku's desperate attempts to strike her. While Goku dives in at her repeatedly with a massive grin on his face, Krillin looks a bit less happy while attempting to do the same to Gohan. When they step off the dais onto the time chamber proper, both Tien and Yamcha collapse to the ground, unable to stand. Over their time in this place, Mirai is ruthless in her training regime. She does not strike to injure, but she has no issue with causing pain. While Goku is up for this, and Gohan is oddly blasé about it, the others certainly take a while to get used to it. It's not cruel, not really, just intense and focused, just like her father had taught her, and his master had taught him, after a fashion. When Vegeta eventually makes his way off the foyer and into the 10 Gs of the time chamber, he finds it rather pleasant. They finally got the right idea, don't they? This is much better to train in, being close enough to their homeworld's native gravity. He is, of course, disdainful of training with anyone but that Mirai woman who had so completely wrecked him back in those wastelands. He is also curious about her strange, golden-haired transformation that seems to amplify her power beyond recognition. His time spent in that bed, recovering, were not wasted, it seems. Having seen some of how these Earthlings seem able to sense energies, he has spent his somewhat forced downtime exploring his own senses, and his budding ability to do so has caused him much consternation when he turns it on the now golden-haired woman who claims to be from the future. When he asks why she feels like Kakarot and the boy, Mirai glances at Goku and Gohan for a second, then shrugs. But Goku is scratching his head. I knew you felt familiar, he says after a moment. You're a Saiyan too, aren't you? After a pause of Mirai not saying anything, Goku snaps his fingers. And you called me Gramps, he says, smiling. Back when we fought him, he thumbs over at Vegeta. You said, not to worry, Gramps. You had it. The secret out, she fills them in at what passes for evening meal in a place with no sun. Yes, she is in fact the daughter of Gohan, from the future, but Vegeta is not interested in those details. The only thing he wants to know, he demands, is what that overwhelming golden power was. Was it some kind of hybrid potential thing, or what? Tell me, girl, he shouts, and moves in as if to grab her by her jacket, but he checks himself just in time when confronted with that rather cold glare she returns. It's the last thing he saw back in those wastelands, right before everything went dark. And now? Now he is very well aware of the sheer, almost insurmountable power gap between them, not to mention the woman's almost casual brutality in the training sessions. So, imagine the balls on this guy to even try a move like that with her. Regarding that golden form, Mirai unfortunately has no idea what it actually is. Only that it first triggered in her dad when he saw her mother and his own dead at the feet of those machines. He described it later as a kind of bubbling up from within, taking over his mind and senses with an overwhelming rage. Then those same machines had promptly beat the crap out of him, even more ruthlessly than they had previously. For him, it was rage and grief, stirred vigorously and brought to the boiling point. But for her, it was it just kind of happened when she really went for it. It was almost like a reflex. So far, though, try as she might, she hadn't seen any trace of it in either Goku or her father's younger self. It had taken the man years of constant beatdowns to get to that point anyway, so who knows how long it'll take them. Besides, they're only 6 months into their 2 years, so who knows, it may not happen for them for a while, if at all, in this place. That night, or what passes for night in this crushing white void, Vegeta lays in his capsule house bunk, grateful for the darkness it provides, and he thinks back to the tales his father had told him. Tales regarding blonde-haired Saiyans and the overwhelming power it was said to offer. He smiles as he imagines that power for himself, as he imagines holding Kakarot. No, not Kakarot. Frieza. Yes, holding Frieza in his grasp and crushing the life out of him. At around the 13-month mark, his dreams and pride in his Royal Saiyan blood both take another massive blow, as of all people the boy, that annoyingly powerful half-breed, finally manages to break through. She'd been right about his trigger, of course. For him, it was rage and sadness. He had focused on how those he cared about would all die. He had then promptly collapsed from the exertion. Then, not 2 months later, that low-class piece of trash Kakarot had managed it too, and he didn't collapse. It had taken Mirai, holding down both Gohan, her own father apparently, and that small bald guy, and threatening to kill them if the man didn't stop her. At the time, Vegeta wasn't entirely sure it was an empty threat. The look on her face, the menace in her voice, and her laugh as she goaded that idiot over the edge. It was so incredible to watch that Vegeta had found himself actually smiling, despite the repeated blows to his pride. It almost didn't matter. When the instant Kakarot broke through, she dispelled the massive ball of energy as if it had never existed, and the two, volunteers casually got up and brushed themselves off to congratulate the awkwardly seething Kakarot. By the gods, though, she was a proper Saiyan, though, through and through, despite being only a half-breed. Or, no, a quarter-breed. Unfortunately for the Prince of the Saiyans, things do not go his way. At least, not in the confines of the hyperbolic time chamber. His efforts to break through himself just left him drained and bitter as he watched Gohan, Mirai, and Kakarot sparring. But if Kakarot could do it, why couldn't he? He had rage, didn't he? Had he not suffered and toiled under the boot of Lord Frieza all those years since his birthright, the planet Vegeta, was destroyed by some meteor? Eventually, with only 4 of the 24 months they had left, he turns to the human contingent, and, barely able to look at them, he asks if they will, please, teach him that Kaio thing that Kakarot had taught them all the way back at the beginning of all this place. He'd be damned if he'd learn it directly from Kakarot himself, but the humans are all a bit hesitant. If that Mirai girl's story is true, and it certainly rings that way, in another time, he and that Nappa guy would have been the death of them. Yamcha, Chiaotzu, Tien, and finally Krillin had all died to Nappa before Goku had done him in, and Nappa had answered to Vegeta, right up to the point where he, at least in this current version of events, had blasted the mostly broken man into oblivion. He's about to walk away when Mirai comes up and asks why they won't teach it to him. They are all currently much weaker than the Prince guy, even with their ×2 and 3, and in Tien's case, ×5 Kaiokens. It's not like teaching it to the man will make them any less likely to fall victim to him, should he turn on them. But don't worry, she says, smiling almost sweetly at the Prince. If he even thinks about looking funny at you, say the word, and she'll happily bounce him off this weirdly indestructible ground so hard it'll take him a week to come back down. By the time Mirai's 24 months are up, Vegeta has got the basics down pat, and can get up to ×3 before giving out. He tries to push higher, expecting those magical Senzu to be on hand when he comes out, but his hopes are dashed when he is reminded that it's only been 2 days outside. He hadn't heard Korin's exquisitely detailed description of what happens when one eats one that is not ripe. Oolong's experience with Bulma's sweet trot candy might prove informative there. When they exit, Mirai, Goku, Gohan, and Krillin are thrilled to finally be out of the place. 2 hours later, Tien comes out with Yamcha and Vegeta. Vegeta, for one, had wanted to use that extra month without the other Saiyans there to try for that golden-haired form again. What he was sure by now was actually the Super Saiyan of legend that he had been babbling on about. He actually wanted both Tien and Yamcha to leave early as well, but they'd just ignored him and done their own thing, so he'd made it work. Well, he hadn't made it work, just his training regime. He still could not get a handle on that tantalizing transformation. There wasn't even the slightest feel of it to tickle at his senses. They spend the remaining 5 days of ship construction relaxing, as Goku highly recommends, as they have all worked so hard these last 2 years. They need a break, and they are all happy to take it. Even Vegeta finds himself happy to be out of that place, if not back into this irritatingly low gravity. His armor is of course long gone, as is most of Mirai's jacket. She'd found the thing in her teens while digging through the rubble of Capsule Corp, so despite its current state, she still wore the few remaining scraps. Luckily, Bulma has on hand the original that she'd actually recognized instantly, seeing it on the girl only a few days ago. When Vegeta sees this exchange, he strolls over and hands Bulma the few remaining shreds of his own armor, and asks for a new set. Bulma raises an eyebrow, and then says, maybe later. Can't you see she's busy? And she walks off, muttering about insufferable ingrate Saiyan princesses. When the now 7-year-old Gohan returns home with his dad and, Mirai, Chi-Chi is at first overjoyed, then confused, then sad, and finally, after all that is out of the way, absolutely livid. Her little 5-year-old baby that she'd lost for a year, then saw for barely a day, is now 7? 2 whole years of his life? Of reading and learning, and who the hell is this? She exclaims, finally noticing Mirai, who was quietly watching her grandmother from the corner, as she in turn was fretting over this new Gohan. Gohan, of course, introduces his, it's kind of his future daughter, called Mirai. To everyone's surprise, especially Mirai, Chi-Chi wastes no time in approaching her, and a quick appraisal and hair smoothing later, she welcomes her into the family. Any child of Gohan is welcome here, Chi-Chi says as she sees Mirai's awkward look. And as Chi-Chi embraces her granddaughter from another time, we will bring Part 4 to a close. Mirai has done what she can in the depths of the hyperbolic time chamber, and the results seem to be fairly good. While her gains are not as substantial as some, spending most of her time without another Super Saiyan to spar with, she has, with her grandfather's help, unlocked something slightly beyond the base Super Saiyan state. Super Saiyan Grade 2 is as impressive as ever, but Goku seems oddly reluctant to head down that path. He had instead busied himself with trying to stay in the base state for as long as possible, and was having some manner of success with it. Unfortunately for the prince, the mighty Super Saiyan form still eludes him, but heading now to meet Frieza and the Namekians, perhaps he will find his own trigger. That is, of course, assuming Frieza ever makes it past Go to collect his $200, given even Krillin's new base power of about 850,000. Unlock that, Guru. Well, find out next time on Dragon Ball. What if Piccolo stayed evil?